feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words upon now, it's made with good intentions.
Welcome to 1 of 200, the Politics and Media podcast here in Aotearoa. Kia ora, everybody. I'm joined by some co-hosts. Hey, Stephanie, how are you doing?
Kia ora, Kyle. I'm a bit croaky, but that seems to be the norm for me whenever I'm recording, so I'm sure it'll wear off just as soon as I need to yell about Chris Hipkins for too long.
It's actually the rule. We're also joined by Ginny. How are you?
Could be worse. Yeah, could be worse.
Wow, things are really looking up in 1 of 200. What are we, a ville? Land? I don't know. And Simone, the other co-host joining us this morning. How are you doing?
Kia ora, Carl. I'm the substitute Philip. So in honor of that, I'll be saying, you've got to hand it to X, Y, and Z. I'm half a coffee in, so I'm doing okay. And I also have water in I found like a pom-pom fitting water bottle at Kmart. And, as we all know, the biggest news this week is that the Sundial character rankings are coming out at the end of today. So
yeah, we'll talk about that next week.
On par with the Iran strikes, it is going to be on the agenda, people.
You got to keep an eye on that one. Got to keep an eye on what's happening in pop culture. Otherwise, you're missing out. You're missing vital threads of the discourse. We've got a range of stuff to talk about. A lot of it is around the way in which messaging and narratives being pushed across the West. I actually think we're going to start with Mamdani because that's shaken things up somewhat. There's this young upstart, Zohran Mamdani, was running in the Democratic primary for New York mayor. Andrew Cuomo was his main competitor, former New York governor. And the new guy won out with a pretty, what would you say, unapologetically left-wing set of policies and messaging. I like this guy more than Bernie Sanders, but I think the comparison is relevant here in a US perspective in terms of the way that he completely seemed to have caught the establishment unawares and just got so much popular support. A huge on-the-ground campaign to get people involved. I think something like 7,000 volunteers, like in the main cohort. Yeah, and coming into the win, you saw the grip on reality of both, those on the right and the other people on the right, the Democratic establishment, start to slip as they began to realize that they'd lost to this kind of candidate again. And then when he won a couple of days ago, just absolutely went off the deep end. How have other people felt about kind of seeing this from afar? Because I think there's always this feeling like, oh, why isn't everyone doing a Mamdani campaign, right? Like, oh, why can't we apply this in our country, in our local elections, and at our national level? And so I think it's useful to think about these kind of campaigns, these kind of candidates, and the way that some of these strategies could be used at home.
Yeah, why can't we have an All Blacks, asks Costa Rica? Like, it takes years of, this is the thing that's invisible. Everybody sees the spokesperson, they don't see the behind the scenes, right? Like NYC DSA has been working on the sort of infrastructure that's required to organize, to canvass, to run this sort of machine. Something like, 50,000 volunteers knocking 1.7 million doors. To get 50,000 volunteers, you need to, already have a core group of people who are ready to go, and they were. And the other thing is, you need to have people who have been working on organizing this infrastructure, including the online infrastructure for all of the signups, the core people who are the field officers who are ready to run this, and have it be in place. And this is a thing that, very obviously we can learn from the unions, but in part as well, I think this is just something that took a long time. And there were a lot of really small campaigns, or not even campaigns, I should say, just small little affordances of being a socialist group in New York, like having their brake light clinics and things like that, right? You have these small things that materially improve people's lives, they get involved, and then you've got people who are able to learn how to do these skills, and then they can rope other people into it. And so when you have somebody like Zohran Mamdani, who has that charisma, who has the ability to communicate the message, then everything is not in place, but the ability is there to set this infrastructure up. And I believe that he started realistically constructing this stuff, even beforehand with his assembly career, right? But for the mayoralty, it was something like a year out from it. And we don't We don't do that.
I think that's a really vital point, and Simone, I'm glad you brought it back to Mamdani as a candidate as well, because I'm sitting here as the comms nerd being like, well, yeah, but you need good comms and a good candidate as well as a great machine. But I think what's happened previously in Aotearoa is that we've seen, I mean, mostly the Labour Party, because they are the biggest party of the nominal left here, assume that the machine is what gets it done. And I think that was a lesson that a lot of centre-left parties took from the Obama campaign, which the thinking of that is still dominating a lot of electoral campaigning for Labour parties across the Anglosphere, which is that, well, we'll just get Nation Builder and then we'll just knock on all the doors and then people will just turn up to vote for us. But they keep, I would say deliberately, missing that key element of having the person who people care enough about, or the cause that people care enough about, to go out and do the door knocking and be persuasive. They're not just default. I mean, it's a bit different in the US because they're a two-party system, but in Aotearoa, we are not a default two-party system where people are just going to tick either you or National. You need to persuade people and inspire people and get people out there for something they believe in and are excited by. And I think, for me, from the comms perspective, what the campaign also really showed is that it is entirely possible to talk the big picture politics, neoliberalism is the problem, and also do the tangible stuff. And in fact, it's stronger when you do both. It is much stronger when you say, we're going to tax wealth above $1 million. And also, we should measure our success by whether or not halal carts are $10 or $8. Like, joining all of those things together with a very charismatic candidate with the machine behind him is what got this done. And also, I'm sorry, this is a little dig at some of my Wellington local government comrades. You can be mature about systems like ranked choice voting. The fact that Mamdani and Brad Lander, who was the other kind of leading progressive candidate, actively went out and said, look, it's ranked choice. Just put each of us one or two. We're not going to be dicks about who you put one or who you put two. Just don't put Cuomo anywhere. That, I think, also shows an authenticity and an integrity that is so often lacking with centre-left campaigns, particularly if we look at like the Harris campaign, where it's much more about the triangulation and, oh, we'll just get the door knockers out there and then people will show up for us. And meanwhile, we'll muzzle Tim Walz, who's probably our best weapon in this entire freaking campaign.
Yeah, and I'd say as well, like, we have had these candidates here, right? They're just not global phenomena. So Chloe Swarbrick's win in Auckland Central arguably used these kind of mechanisms. And then Tamitha Paul down in Wellington Central. You know, the Greens have been pretty successful with using this combination of campaign techniques and mechanics. But I think, you know, as much as we're saying it's not just the machinery, we do come back to that issue that a lot of the machinery here is tied up. And a lot of the way that electoral politics here works is to centralize power and money, or resources, I should say, I guess more broadly, and doesn't, I guess, almost doesn't expect to have to build those structures to build the campaign out of. You know, Labour continues to just use what it built 30, 40 years ago. It was slowly degrading less and less members, tries to tap the unions who are in a similar situation, spend, what, $400,000 plus on a series of billboards. That money could have just gone to small pop-ups and regional kind of electorates, right? To get some structure, to get some resources, just buy everyone biscuits. I don't know, like get people out and actually doing things prior to the campaign. Like, we're so brutally focused on just doing that couple of months coming into the major campaign and just overworking, burning everyone out as if that's the only time the work can be done. The Green Party under Shaw was doing similar. There's a real centralization of power towards the executive, and campaigns like Chloe's, and I guess Tamitha's doesn't even really count because she was starting at council level, right? That's where she was building her organizing base. We're kind of bucking the trend. There was a new direction for the Greens at the time. That was only, you know, not too many years ago that we had that shift. But, you know, you mentioned Nation Builder. So similar across a lot of, I guess across both the Greens and Labour. Like, it's about sending out those emails. You know, if you're on social media, you would have seen people dunking on the Green Party emails in particular a fair amount. because they don't seem to target who I would say would be the core Green voter. They seem to target upper class eco store owners. And it just doesn't put you in a position to organize across a country like this effectively.
Kyle, what do you have against reusable canvas bags with screen printing on them?
Everyone
Absolutely
hates a
nothing.
blue-green voter, you know that. I mean, maybe just me. I just
Even
think that it,
themselves, I think. That's why they're so sad in their home-based homes with their little dogs.
There are
yeah,
no
these dogs are
blue-green
always so
voters.
small.
Blue-green voting is a lie. We don't have time for all of my thoughts on this.
I think the one thing we can maybe take among everything that's already been said for something like a Mamdani victory that has a fair amount of global attention on it is it proves the use case, right? And people can go like, oh, the serious people in the offices who are running campaigns, who are at the top of party hierarchies and etc. Look at it and go, maybe my thinking needs to shift a little. The Dems in the US seem maybe not to have quite grasped that. You got some mainstream Dems kind of locking in behind Mamdani now, saying, "Oh, congratulations," etc. But then Cuomo just decides that he's going to run for run for mayor in the main elections now.
Most of them have changed their minds because the donors have said no. They've turned around, even the ones that were mildly supporting him.
Yeah, I mean,
They're going to
there you
rat
go,
fuck
right?
him, basically.
But we're going to try. But yeah, it gives this kind of global signal. Hey, maybe something a little different might be possible.
Yeah, I think in terms of a global signal, though, I think it can't really be understated or overstated. Sorry, not understated. It can't be overstated at like I think the average younger age of like someone who was canvassing for Zoran. Like I know a friend who was doing that in New York City, and she's like in her early 20s, for example, and she was telling me how she would just be in like a Valorant lobby, and then she would just start talking about it. They'd be like, "What are you doing this weekend?" She'd be like, "Oh, I'm canvassing for Zoran Mamdani," and they'd be like, some kid would be like, "Oh, is it like the guy who was running for mayor?" And then she'd be like, "Yeah, like that dude." And then she would just talk about it in the Valorant
In
lobby.
the Valorant lobby.
Yeah, which is really silly. And then she would
Amazing.
leave flyers as well when she went to like fancy restaurants. She would leave flyers around and things like that. And like she said, honestly, like she was expecting like a 0% hit rate leaving a flyer for Zoran at a Michelin-starred restaurant. But people actually texted her off the flyer and they were like, "Hey, like, how did you get involved in this? Like, what's your story?" So I feel like it's hard to overstate the effectiveness of having young people with energy on the ground doing stuff all the time and like capturing, I guess, the vote in unexpected ways. Like, I think it's one thing to run really, really polished messaging, but also to realize how allergic lots of people are to that. People who are like of voting age or like slightly younger than, I guess, the average Democratic supporter. People like that are just so allergic to being told what to do by something that looks really, really professional and they're much more like to accept like the reasoning of like a Discord e-girl about why they're voting for Zoran Mamdani than like their parents who might be Democrats themselves, you know? So I'm not saying go spend money on influencer campaigns if you're the Labour Party here or the Green Party in New Zealand, but definitely I think what Carl was saying before, it's like you should just be empowering people that support you to do the work. Like, don't be sending like EDMs or like regular mailers with like CRM personalization being like, "Hey, first name, like thanks for coming to the Green, do you know what the Green Party cares about? It's these three things." Like,
You know
let
what the Green
people,
Party cares about? Getting $5 from me. That's what the Green Party cares about.
they should let people that do, I guess, the canvassing and the volunteering talk about what the party means to them, right? Like what a win would mean to them. And whether it's things like the halal cart thing, which resonates with like 90% of people that live in New York, or it's about how just everything's how eggs are too expensive. Like the line doesn't have to be inspired. It just has to be true. And I think like we just have to capture the energy somehow over here if we want to have even a hope of pushing back the coalition.
Yeah, the substance needs to be there. The policy needs to be there.
Mm.
One thing that I thought people were going to make too much hay over, but they seem not to have really talked about that much, is that it's not just the comms in respect of like, oh, they're like talking to people on social media. It is the exceedingly slick way they've done it with somebody who is phenomenally talented. Then I don't know what media training Mamdani's had, but if somebody asks him a thorny question, he has a number of rhetorical devices that he can use to reframe what are essentially extreme right-wing neoliberal questions, right? So he's always able to turn it around and he doesn't accept the framing. You compare that to somebody like Chris Hipkins, who will answer a question accepting this extremist framing about, the retirement age needing to be raised or something, or of course we're fiscally concerned about the country's finances because it runs like a household. Like, if you don't accept those things, you have to be able to reframe them within a few seconds, and then you explain what your approach is to solving what the underlying actual issue is, which has nothing to do with those things. I have some qualms with him about how he's approached questions about Israel, even though I mean, to be fair, he's been bombarded by them because all of the media figures are wildly and obscenely racist and Islamophobic against him. But I think Francesca Albanese answers some of those basic questions a lot better than him, even if she's not as charismatic, right? And I understand that it connects with ordinary people. The same as like defund the police, you know. I think it's imperfect, but certainly it's miles better than almost anybody else who's been doing anything similar to that. And if you want to look at the slickness of it, he can do a video in Hindi which references through like visual pastiche the style of a Bollywood movie and intercut clips from them, right? And he and this team can turn that around in a few hours. Literally, I've been looking into how they were doing it, how the team worked, like who all the different parts were for all of that. And it's wildly successful. And that is something that we don't have here, namely because a lot of our talent are kept out of the creative industries because they're not rich kids. So like we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot here. But if a big machine like Labour wants to do that, you have to be able to nurture not just the student government DebSoc members who really want a seat in the big chair, like Hipkins. You also have to nurture a number of other things. Part of that is your politics can actually do it on a national level. But even within your organization, you can get these people involved and nurture them and teach them and mentor them and connect them up with other creatives. And you've got a stew going, right? And you have the ability to do that.
I think it can't be overstated enough, in agreement with you, Simone, that a lot of our political parties, and when I say a lot, look, the two I've been involved in are Labour and the Greens, and they've both wrangled with this issue, but there has been a history of taking young, excited, passionate people and getting them to stuff envelopes and door knock and then shutting them out of the policy process, or shutting them down if they get vocal on social media, or basically saying, well, you can't have a Twitter account for your network, or you can't be organizing events that aren't signed off by head office, and it just kills enthusiasm immediately. We have to be able to accept some jankiness. And I think also tying into your point about reframing the bad questions, which, one, all of the bad questions are repetitive as fuck, so people should be able to plan for them. But also the whole thing we mock that Ardern and Hipkins and Lux and all do, which is, well, what I can say to you is, which just comes off as obstructive and avoiding the question. Whereas if you come out with a really clear, yeah, that's nonsense, Corin, what's actually happening is just much more direct, but it also requires you to have confidence in what you believe in and to be thinking about the principle you stand for, rather than, oh, I need to find the right way to word this so no one will be mad at me. And absolutely, talking your point about how Francesca Albanese talks about the question, again, one of those predictable questions, but do you agree that Israel has a right to exist? And she just goes, no state has a right to exist. States don't have rights. That's not a thing. And to do that, you have to not be worrying about, oh, if I say this, is someone going to clip it out of context and misinterpret it on a YouTube video where they call me a Nazi. You have to just be able to go, the people who I'm trying to reach will get it. And if they're not sure, they'll ask questions. And the people who are going to hate me are going to hate me anyway, so fuck them.
Yeah, and I think alongside, that kind of approach, and I think it's as true here, if not more true, is that people are disliking the media here more and more. And seeing someone from the left actually push back a little bit more roughly, it will be hugely popular. Not to say that this effect would work in the same way for the left as it does for the right, given, everything we know. But David Seymour is saying they need to basically destroy New Zealand media, and being often touted as maybe the savior of media somehow. You can't do too badly if you choose to push back on media and just deal with what comes out of it. I was thinking about, you're saying the knee-jerk reaction to kind of quash the energy of young people involved in the campaign. You go back a couple of decades, even, and it's always been the way in which the media and the establishment deals with the Greens is to pick off young campaign members and kind of push for acquiescence of the party leadership to turn on their own. So, sometimes a person in the campaign makes a mistake. Sometimes someone says something on social media that isn't worded particularly well, and suddenly there'll be like 2 days of media stories about like a 20-year-old who was involved in a particular electorate campaign. And in the past, the leadership or the people leading comms for the Greens have gone, oh, that doesn't represent the Greens. They've been removed from all their roles. And what you've done is you've probably just lost one of your best campaigners who had enough passion and enough energy to be out there doing this work, and just wasn't quite there yet with the comms side of it. Or was doing something that's actually good, and it just made you uncomfortable, right? And we haven't seen that so much recently, but it's going to be coming next year in 2026, I think. We're going to see that kind of targeting happening, I believe. And leadership for Labour, the Greens, and Te Pāti Māori are going to have to be very clear that they don't get pulled into it. On that note, we just had something which is that goes well across that line. We talked about it a little last week as well, but a little bit more information has kind of developed through the discourse, and that's David Seymour attacking members of the public who have publicly opposed his regulatory standards bill, putting their names and faces up on his social media accounts, calling them victims of the day, and then leaving comments open and aiming his audience at these, well, I don't know, what do you call them? Public intellectuals, perhaps? Some of them academics, retired politicians. And this is the kind of thing that probably should have someone kind of kicked out of their role. He's Deputy Prime Minister now. This is clearly a breach of the cabinet manual. Media should probably be handing about it. Instead, they've verbatim reported on it, often reporting his exact lines and keeping his framing, which is a major part of the issue with what he's doing. And it turns out from this week that it wasn't even his party creating these. He'd got Parliamentary Services to do it, and was putting a parliamentary crest on the graphics to show that Parliamentary Services money had been used to create these. I would have thought Parliamentary Services should have said, no, we can't do this.
Well,
But apparently,
it won't be Parliamentary Services, it'll be his parliamentary staff putting it
Yeah.
on. So it's not like it's been pushed up the chain to them. And I've only worked in I have worked in a Parliamentary Services office, but I've mostly worked in a Ministerial Services office. And this is one of those things where I feel like the rules aren't really designed for the worst performers in Parliament, because it's very much, you're not allowed to use Parliamentary Services stuff for campaigning. But of course, those of us with a slightly critical mindset of how media and narrative and policy works know that everything a politician does is campaigning. I remember a few years back when I was a public servant, so not in Parliament, the State Services Commissioners, or at the time, put out some incredibly cringe office-themed ads about what public servants could or couldn't do in elections, because obviously public servants are citizens and in their personal life they are entitled to be political, as long as it's not a conflict with their actual role. But this video they did and the guidance they did was kind of like, if your minister wants you to put the words "vote national" in a media release, you should not do that. And it's like, well, no fucking shit, you shouldn't do that, guys. But there is such a hugely grey line between what is campaigning and what is the normal discharge of a member of parliament's duties. And of course, Seymour is claiming that the use of the parliamentary crest is fine because it's actually just part of the discourse around a piece of legislation going through Parliament. And I know that it's never it's never like it doesn't change anyone's minds to point out the hypocrisy, but it is one of these fucking things where this man is against public funding of pretty much everything, but by God, he will use the public funding when it means more staff in his office and more boosting of his Facebook ads. So it just feels like one of those things where these guys are so arrogant and so entitled to the power and the public funding they get in their roles that they probably didn't even think about it. And now that it's been pointed out by, I think, Dame Anne Salmond and Tori Fano, suddenly it's going to turn into this, well, is it technically actually not okay? When what we should be talking about is that this is Nazi shit. Targeting your political opponents and saying this person is deranged and untrustworthy and shouldn't have a public voice on matters of public policy is Nazi shit. And I don't want to put my hand on the lathe or touch the cursed monkey's paw, but is it going to take them doing this to a journalist for the media to give a shit?
Well, we
And
already
by
know
a
the
journalist,
answer to that.
I mean like a popular journalist who they all like they'd need to do it to I don't know a veteran of the press gallery like Audrey Young, because no one's going to care if they do it to
John Campbell.
yeah,
John
John
Campbell.
Campbell. Well, you know, because he can take it. You know, he's tough enough. You know, they
Well, this is
wouldn't
the
do it
thing.
for
They did it
yeah.
this week, right? David Seymour started bringing a camera into his media interviews, and then he goes, "Oh, and we released it so you can see the full interview in context." And it turns out that, the station had already released it before David Seymour had even done this. It's just the most ridiculous stuff. That's a really weird, uncomfortable interview because John Campbell's like, "Why have you brought a camera?" And he's like, "Oh, are you scared? Are you scared of people seeing the truth?" And he's like, "Who are you? What is going on?" But I don't even know if them targeting a journalist would just end with that journalist being picked off at this point. The lengths to which commentators, which a lot of the press gallery are now, most of them aren't doing even reporting at this stage, will go to like hold water for David Seymour is absurd. I mentioned it at the start, but it's like Duncan Greig comes out and does a piece and says, "Is this guy actually the savior of media in New Zealand?" After he's been calling to like defund Newshub, he's celebrated Newshub going down. He's calling for the defunding of RNZ and TVNZ. And like, oh, this guy who viscerally dislikes us, who already aims his audience at us, who pushes distrust against the media from a far right frame, we're gonna let him do it. Like our response to that is to platform him more and to not push back and to accept what he's saying. I don't know if that's maybe if he went after someone like Audrey Young, or Tracy Watkins, if they're just like this little upstart, but more likely they'd be like, "Oh, it's all part of the game. Oh, he's what a young upstart. They'd love it."
He's not young, Kyle. He's the same age as me. A fact that haunts me.
Oh, I'm just talking about how they see it, right? Like, because
That's
they're all in
so
their
young.
60s.
Thank you, Simone.
I mean, I just think that no matter what happens, I think that it'll just be reported verbatim, as you've been saying. Like they'll just be like, oh, like David Seymour now makes a Instagram post about X or Y respected journalist, and they'll just reprint his comments from the Instagram post verbatim, right? Like I don't think there's going to be any critique whatsoever. I do think it is really strange though that I don't, and I'm not someone who's ever worked with the government. But like, I think they approached Parliamentary Services for comment, and no one would say whether or not the post actually fulfilled a parliamentary purpose. When I think you should be able to quite clearly look at that shit and just go, no. I mean, I guess the line is that it's helping people engage with legislation, but that's just, come on, like some of us here in the room, unlike Duncan Grieve, have more than just two brain cells that are just like mutually masturbating in the vast expanse of our skull. So I think we would be able to tell that none of this commentary actually helps people engage with legislation. It's a personal attack. It's like being doxxed or being swatted, right? For the younger people in the
Absolutely.
audience. That's kind of what it is. It's like you're swatting Twitch streamers or something because you dislike them. And it is incredibly Nazi shit. I just don't really understand what people that enforce, I guess, these processes gain from not cracking down on this because it can only get worse from here. Like if we
Well,
give David Seymour like I don't know more free rein, he's just gonna take it.
mm,
Like we're this close to him like just shitting on stage in an interview and being like eat it. Like I just don't think he's displayed any respect for press, any respect for the office of parliament, any respect for the people that even fucking voted for him.
mm.
Like I know that I know that the bigger thing is just how unacceptable socially this behavior is in general from the party. But I think he himself has engaged in such an onerous and just such an odious smear campaign that it's only going to be worse next year. This is where we're at now. We're not even in the crunch time yet. Can you imagine how bad this is going to be next year?
And
Like,
he's been emboldened on so many fronts
yeah,
because the other point I would make about the hypocrisy is this is a man and a party who spent months railing against Tusiata Avia because she wrote a poem about Captain Cook which
hmm
included swears
hmm
and, some artistic wishes of violence upon people. It's clearly a fucking poem with a political message, and they turned
yeah,
that into she wants to stab all white people. And
yeah,
then the other one
Inshallah.
is
yeah,
the other one is the Te Pāti Māori haka, which the
yeah,
ACT Party turned into Debbie Ngarewa Packer pointed her fingers at us like it was a gun. We were so frightened. She needs to be suspended. But post after post after post from the Deputy Prime Minister of this country pointing at political rivals and saying these people need to be removed from public discourse.
yeah,
Like that's okay because then he goes in and he's acting prime minister, God help us, and does the post cabinet stand up and it's just like, oh, it's just playful, it's just a joke, and no one asks, well, what's the joke? What's the punchline, David? Why is this funny? Do you really think it's playful given the current political climate? Do you think, given that we had an occupation of parliament with people threatening to prosecute and hang the prime minister and the director general of health, that this is the kind of discourse you want to be engaging with? And when you then want to turn around and say the regulatory standards bill is about serious policy making, why should anyone take you seriously? Except they keep doing it, and I feel like I'm going mad.
Yeah, it's really frustrating. And yeah, that juxtaposition, I guess, of the way in which he plays the victim and then doesn't. And it's both are picked up by the media and reported verbatim. Like the media hate against the Pāti Māori was obscene. They're just accepting like some of these outrageous things that the ACT Party was saying and or national. And New Zealand First, and then turn around and don't apply it to much clearer examples. Yeah, and I genuinely don't know like the best way out of that, except as we've said for a long time, to have a different information pipeline at this point. I mean, you have to work with the media as they exist because that's still where the biggest audience is for now. But when you engage them, you're actively seeking to disrupt. You're actively seeking to push people to your own sources of information because you could have, I think we're at the point where you could have like an outrageously popular candidate here, and the media is just going to monster them. Like much less progressive candidates than, say, a Mamdani or a Jeremy Corbyn would still get Corbyned here.
I know it's such small fry, but I feel that if you have a reaction like David Seymour to seeing a haka, as if you have been so surrounded by whatever passes for culture in Pākehā circles, whatever it is, your entire life, that you don't even know the indigenous culture of this country. If you get some sort of offense basically because this is your like first time seeing it or whatever it is, which it isn't, he's just making it up, right? He's been to Waitangi. But suppose that that's the case, that should disqualify you from office, because in the same way as like refusing, like I actually don't agree that we should have this, because I think it's really stupid to have a fucking king. But if you're gonna be like, you need to take the oath in order to, take your seat in parliament, guess what? This country is founded on a treaty which says it is a partnership between two people groups. If you can't accept one of those people groups, you should be barred from parliament. Like, he should not be able to do his job. That should be a constitutional rule, right? Like, it's fucking ridiculous if you don't have education and what's tika, or like just very basic, like how does this work? How does like that sort of challenge work? How does this sort of discourse work in Indigenous New Zealand, right? Truly ridiculous. And instead we have a media that are willing to, I mean, carry water is certainly one way of putting it. I think that Ginny's disgusting image from earlier probably is a lot closer to it, because metaphorically that's what they're doing all the time. Maybe nicely we could say they're like licking his polished toes, but I don't know, there's probably foot freaks out there that probably would
I
enjoy
think
me saying
I
that,
think
so
that
please
way
don't.
you've put it is almost too gentle. Like it's too respectable to describe what they're doing as licking his toes. Like there is some level of underlying nastiness there.
Yeah.
Um, which is
I
way
don't think it's
freakier than just licking toes.
extreme.
I'm just gonna say right now.
You had a point to say.
No, I'm just gonna say I mean, this is just me positing now, but I feel like the blackmail material must be insane because they're not paying these outlets a whole bunch of money to do this, right? Like we're not suddenly hiring 20 new journalists to work anywhere. The spin-off certainly isn't increasing their funding. They're still begging for money via EDMs. So, like, what is the point of publishing an editorial like the one that Doug and Grieve did when, like, clearly no financial handout is being made? Like, what is the benefit here? What secret are you protecting? Like they Act Party must have some ridiculous.
Seymour has hired Mossad to show like the editor of the spin-off fucking children. That must be what's going on,
Like there's
right?
just some like weird no look like
There's a
we've got
PB tape for fucking like the owner of the Herald.
we didn't have to go all the way to Masada. Like we have aura in this country, you know what I mean? Like
That's right, yeah, like in the
genuinely,
supermarket.
like
Yeah.
maybe someone's been like casually shoplifting every Sunday at the local New World, you know? Like just some silly stuff. Like I just can't imagine like you're not doing this for money. You're not doing this for love of the public or even love of the game because the editorials are terrible. Like, why does every stuff article now have 25 typos in it? Like,
I've got
who
a
wrote
horrible thing
They
to
don't
this?
have
tell you,
sub-editors.
Jenny. I've got a horrible dose of reality for you. There's no compromise.
Fine.
They're not
No,
compromised in
there's
any way. They're not being blackmailed. They like David Seymour. They're his mates and they want him to win and they want this culture. They want to be a default press corps for accelerating fascism because they love it. They love the power they wield over people. They love to slap down at people. They love people making people feel smaller than them, and they get off on David Seymour being at the top of the country and living out their wildest dreams.
But that's just so embarrassing. You know, like
There are embarrassing people in the world.
if you want to be part of an evil government, like could you at least be stylish? Could you at least look cool? Could you at least be rich? Like
It's New
we're not
Zealand, no.
this is terrible. Like is tall poppy syndrome making this happen in this country? Like why do we only have the world's most average, illiterate, corrupt media and politicians to
There's no
work with?
elite culture. None of them have any literary culture or artistic outbreak. Like, what passes for art? Because I've been spending more time than I should in Ponsonby recently, and what passes for art is just the most embarrassing thing on the world stage. I can't believe myself, really. The lack of culture in this country is, frankly, I don't understand how people get up in the morning. Also, everybody being monolingual, but that's just a whole nother kettle of fish of like why we should be embarrassed on the world stage. But in any case, I think it is exactly that. And like absolute side tangent, try to like you were complaining about 25 typos in every article. I guess they've stopped hiring sub editors a long time ago and they just like farmed it out to Grammarly or something. But like try to find a graph in a stuff article that has more than 2 sentences in it. You can't. You absolutely can't. Most of them are one sentence. Like it's so bad. Everything is so bad. And this is everything, right? We've talked for so long about like how everything in the last like 20 to 30 years has just been the total economic disintegration of the foundation of any sort of news reporting. And a big part of that is, yeah, Google, it's ads, it's all of that, it's Facebook. This is part of it. We're now seeing the second wave of attacks from so-called quote unquote AI, which isn't that. And I think you're also seeing what Kyle's said, which is that there are economic interests aligned, and also because New Zealand is small enough, personal connections and links with somebody like David Seymour. But I think there is another thing which we don't really talk about, which is that when he started, he was careful to go up to the line. It's been years now, and he's been given license and he's cultivated these relationships, and now he's stepping over the line constantly. In fact, he's pushing the envelope quite far. And this isn't handing it to him. I think this is terrible for any semblance of democracy kind of painted over, the bourgeois capitalism, right? However, I do think that there is a fallacy of sunk cost going on here. If you have been giving Seymour license for years, you'd be like, well, I guess you just unconsciously do this. I don't think you self-censor. I think you wouldn't be in your position as a reporter if you actually had thoughts in your head, right? So you let him move it a little bit further. And it's because somewhere deep in the back of your mind, the emotional logic is, well, I've let it go on this far. We can't say stop now, because then what if we were fucking idiots for 10 years? What if we were real pieces of shit who've been destroying this country for 10 years? Can't be that. Guess we better keep going. And I don't think we talk enough about that.
Well, this is another factor, and I'll hand it over to you on this one, Stephanie, because we are seeing, and this is something I talked about online a fair amount, this radicalization of leadership and of newsrooms, and the same thing happened in the UK, particularly around trans rights. And here in New Zealand, we've seen it with regards to Gaza and to a lot of other coverage of enemies of the West, in air quotes, particularly with what was happening with the attacks on Iran in the last couple of weeks. The way in which the people framing up the news, the editors, media leadership, some of the journalists, are just far more right-wing and neocon and nasty than the general public. And this has been horrifically exemplified over the last 3 weeks, I think it is, on the back of some of David Farrier's coverage of an RNZ article about the death of a young trans man. And RNZ, the journalist and now the editorial, and I assume the leadership of RNZ, have just said, no, we didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, so I had flagged to Carl that I had some thoughts about that. And I do want to start with two disclaimers. Like, one, there is good journalism happening in Aotearoa, and I want to set that bar because it's relevant to what I'm going to say. There are journos out there who are actually developing sources, actually asking follow-up questions, actually providing context and information around issues, so that when, a lot of them pull the whole, well, we just have to report what David Seymour says because, that allows people to make up their own minds. But you can't do that in a vacuum with no context if you're not given it. There are journos doing that. They are sadly few and far between. A lot of them have Substacks now. Substack is a garbage platform, so give them a subscription and then tell them, please, next year get off Substack so I don't have to renew a Substack. Also, one of 200 on Patreon. But speaking to the Alex story, my second disclaimer is that by far the most important thing about Alex's story is the deliberate erasure of Alex's identity as a trans man by Radio New Zealand, and that should be our number one focus. I'm going to speak to a second tier of fuckery, which goes to more of this downgrading of the media, because honouring Alex's identity and saying that we absolutely need better answers for what happened to Alex and why is the priority. But even if the story weren't about such an important issue, it would be a dog shit story. And anyone who follows me on Blue Sky has seen this rant coming in, because Radio New Zealand have now put out a form response. It starts, "Dear Complainant," because great, couldn't even mail merge people's names into it, I guess. And makes a whole lot of justifications for why actually the story's fine, even though they've now gone in and re-edited it. So sometimes Alex is referred to as Alex with he, him pronouns, and sometimes he's dead named and misgendered, because that's reflecting the perspective of people who knew him, which is going to be really fun if Radio New Zealand ever interviews me about David Seymour, because I have a whole set of names I choose to refer to him by, and I hope that they will respect my perspective in that.
Yeah, I don't respect Fuckwad's dead name, actually.
So it's now an incoherent mess. They are defending it. And the thing that jumped out to me, beyond the issues of identity, the line, "The story, however, is not fundamentally about gender issues, but about the treatment and care provided to a seriously ill person." And my response was, did we read the same fucking article, RNZ? Because the whole article is Alex's parents saying he died because people gendered him correctly. That's the whole story. There are so many issues, so many red flags in what happened to Alex, and none of it gets any kind of consideration or development by Ruth Hill, the so-called journalist who reported this. So just to kind of summarize, I have a postgrad English degree and access to Google, and with that I could have written you a better story about what happened to Alex if we're talking about treatment and care than Ruth Hill did in 3,500 words on Radio New Zealand. The story only mentions emergency accommodation 3 times, headline, first line, and describing that Alex was found emergency accommodation by a support service. Emergency accommodation was in motels was introduced by National in 2016. It has been a massive political issue. Labour has decried it, but then continued it, and then National criticised them for continuing it. Social services all over the country will tell you why it's a terrible idea to be using private motels for emergency accommodation. None of that is in the story. Nothing in the story about how we treat eating disorders in this country. Nothing about the rates of eating disorder. Nothing about the strategy for ED services, which in February, Matt Ducey, the Minister of Mental Health, announced a review of, which from the little coverage that received, seems like it's really timely and useful and could possibly be very relevant, because a factor they highlight is that the strategy we have doesn't really focus on marginalized people or the full range of people who can experience eating disorders, because I think we can all understand that most people, when they think eating disorder, think a teenage girl with anorexia, right? So there's a much broader set of how that kind of thing manifests. And nothing of that is in Ruth Hill's story. I didn't know about this myself. I haven't worked in eating disorders or youth mental health, but you know what I could do? I could Google eating disorder treatment New Zealand and then hit the news tab and then find coverage over the years of people raising issues, NGOs raising issues, Ministry of Health reporting statistics. Ruth Hill couldn't Google that, apparently. Ruth Hill couldn't even notice that 2 days before her article, Radio New Zealand's well-being section has an incredibly in-depth piece from someone who's experienced eating disorders talking about the intersection of ED and the cost of living. And that has statistics. It has quotes from experts. It has all of this context. How can you say that the story about Alex is about the questions around the treatment of an ill person when you don't even have that? There was a third one as well. Oh, yeah. So obviously, Ruth Hill brought hook, line, and sinker into the parents' categorization of Alex's identity, which is probably why she also didn't bother to flag the Counting Ourselves survey, which is a massive report, which always gets a huge amount of media, which highlights how often young trans people are kicked out of home by their transphobic fucking parents. And to not provide that level of information, to not even flag, oh yeah, there are reports that where you've got issues of gender or gender identity, you also have all of these conflating things around mental health, homelessness, deprivation, unemployment. Like, none of that is in this. I can't emphasize enough. 3,500 words, and Ruth Hill doesn't mention treatment of eating disorders. She doesn't mention the experience of young trans people. She doesn't mention the political issues around emergency accommodation. It's like she didn't even think to Google the basic issues she was reporting on, and it should not be possible to write a better article just using Google and publicly available documents. And that's just beyond all of the other much more upsetting parts of the story. It floors me that Radio New Zealand could look at that article and go, oh, it's not about the gender identity though, so it doesn't matter that we misgendered him the entire time. I just thank you for giving me the space to get this off my chest, but it's actually a terrible story. If it were about Nigella Lawson making chocolate cake and she puts one strawberry on top, Radio New Zealand would be telling us that the article wasn't actually about chocolate cake, it was about fruit. Like, that's the level of gaslighting they are delivering to us now, which tells me that, as Kyle says, the only reasonable explanation is that this is a deliberate decision by multiple tiers of Radio New Zealand to push a transphobic story, and just fuck it, frankly.
Yes, they're trying the same thing that they tried in the UK, where they were a lot more successful, and they've been trying the United States, which is that kind of extreme far-right attempt to create a wedge through quote-unquote cultural war issues, which we've sort of picked apart and dissected on this podcast before, where trans people are a really easy minority who don't have access to a lot of wide platforming to denigrate, to try to pull down, to monster, really. They try to monster us, right? Like, there is an attempt to try to create that sort of folk devil figure through it. And then they use proxies, which they conflate through, for example, drag queens, which is, wildly unrelated, but still, within the LGBT sort of community, that there are attempts to try to mystify these things, to use the biggest scare tactics possible, right? Now, I think that this displays really effectively what the fountain of a lot of this sort of transphobia against in particular trans masc people is and comes from, right? It always boils down to the kind of rigid sexual and gender roles of cis heteronormativity. And for trans women, the reason why they're a lot more visible is because, guess what? Men still run and rule the world. And so cis men will always have the sense that trans women are traitors to their gender, and they're doing something disgusting and despicable by becoming less than human, becoming women. So you sort of use misogyny against trans women at the same time as denying that they are women and degendering them and third gendering them, right? There's a sense in which this comes and happens. For trans men or trans masc people generally, the approach is, well, women are supposed to be cis women, are supposed to be baby factories for patriarchy. You are meant to fulfill a feminine role. If you try to move outside of that, you are no longer being the proper, demure, correct baby factory. Come on home, come be a girly. This is why all the detransitioners that get platformed to trans masc as well. It's because you can say, oh no, come back into the fold. All is forgiven as long as you will be a trad housewife for us rather than actually being what you are, which is a trans masc person, right? And that's the way that all of these things always flow out of it. And so you'll see parents and there will be this kind of outpouring of pretend grief about, oh, we lost our daughter, because the hooks of the internet got into him and pulled him away from his rightful place under patriarchy. This is why with Irreversible Damage, with Schreier's book, you see the front cover is literally a little girl with a hole where her womb when she grows up would be, right? And it's called Irreversible Damage. The whole rhetoric, the whole ideology that comes out of this in respect to trans masc people is you are not doing your job at pumping out children and being a housewife, because that is ultimately what transphobia is about reinforcing those gender roles within the economic context of capitalism, right? Always comes back to this. And so you get these two staged sort of crying pieces about a parent saying we lost them for the first time when he, was taken down the rabbit hole of all of these internet sources and people who convinced him that there was something wrong. Of course, these people know nothing about their child. And then the second one is, and then he was taken away for a second time when he was died by self-inflicted death, or what's presumed to be a self-inflicted death, right? I think that you bring up something really important, which is the emergency accommodation, and I want to put a finer point on it, which is to say, this story that they ran in RNZ when Alex's parents kicked him out of home and removed every single piece of support that he had materially in the world is like interviewing a serial killer about the people that they killed and letting them cry on the world stage about it. It's fucking disgusting. You interviewed his killers. What the fuck is wrong with you? And I won't be cool or chill about this, because I think the kind of warped ideology that it takes to look at that and publish it on a national broadcasting level and then refusing to back down about it is just vile. And what you've done really is run roughshod over this human being's life, over this young boy's life, in order to try and advance a political agenda to split, firstly, trans people off from LGBT people, and then, of course, to crack down and repress all LGBT people. And then, of course, the circle narrows and narrows and narrows as fascism always needs an enemy. And this is just the tip of it. And they're trying it again. But on some level, somebody at that organization has to do something. Or I think we have to say you are complicit in this. And everybody can do better about this. I have to say that Farrier did a great piece. I don't think that he should have at any point even used substitute dead name. I don't agree that you should use the same language that TERFs are using to talk about it. You can write the story without that. It's actually not necessary. But this is all a learning process. And I think that when somebody's heart is in the right place and they've done materially a good thing in general, it is important to praise those things and say, look, we can do this a little better, but this is very good.
Yeah, absolutely want to talk all of that. And another thing on people who tried to do the right thing, Hayden Donnell on Media Watch did call out some aspects of this. But I noticed that as his discussion went on, he started slipping into they, them pronouns, which is a thing that uncomfortable cis people do when they're kind of like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing. Maybe it's safer to just go with the neutral option. But when you're talking about a story where it feels very clear that Alex used he, him pronouns, and that is a central part of what's fucked about the reporting of his death, you have to make the effort, cis people. We just have to, if we fuck up, and we learn and we move on. But you've got to hold the line in your own head because the transphobia is so ingrained in us, because we live in a transphobic world. And I also just want to say, Simone, thank you for not being chill about this, because this is something that being chill about is fucking unnecessary. I just also, since you opened the door to some criticism of the parents, because I've wanted to be like, they're obviously grieving and not in the right headspace and maybe resist gender education, just fucking exploited them. But there's one line that's haunted me. So since we're here, we're just going to bring it up, which is when the mother in the story talks about seeing Alex for the last time and says that he was surprised. And I'm like, oh boy, that's some estranged parents of TikTok language right there. Did he know you were visiting? Did you just stalk and invade your estranged child's space because you had to assert control over him? Like, why was he surprised? And you say he looked pleased? Yeah, people put on smiley faces when they're being confronted by someone who they don't think is safe. It's a basic human reaction. And for that to just go unquestioned, it baffles me that no one at RNZ was at least cynical enough to cover their asses. Because I've written op-eds for RNZ, and when I've said things that maybe were not fully detail accurate, but I was being a bit flowery about, I think at the time, either John Key or Bill English, I got some serious pushback from one of their editors of just like, we need you to be really clear about what was actually said or what was actually done, or do you actually have a link we can put in to establish that? So the fact that I've received more pushback for, calling Bill English names than they could possibly give this 3,500 word piece. The fact that even in the list of support agencies, the rainbow agencies are at the bottom of the list, and they have all of these agencies' numbers and couldn't just ring them and say, can you just give us a general statement about, obviously, there's a coronial inquiry happening, so no one's going to give us details, which also raises the question, why couldn't you wait for the coronial inquiry to be done? What was the fucking urgency? There's just so many layers of this being awful transphobia and just the worst abuses of journalism that, yeah, I'm happy to keep talking about it forever, but the listeners might get a bit bored. So
Yeah. It's all right. It's all right. I mean, to me, I think this is an important story for obvious reasons, but also because of the institutional and structural level at which this sort of thing happens, right? There will always be this thin patina of like, oh, here's the rainbow education or something like that. Do not expect the institutions, the state, or its communicative apparatuses like the agenda setting press to support you because of exactly that, right? When I think about how I've had, a trans man client working criminal defense, and the police paperwork, which is the first thing that I got before I met him, used his dead name and wrong gender. And so I was expecting to see this totally different person, right? Like there was a lie there, right, on the paperwork. But also, I don't want to know his dead name. I don't want to know like what has happened before he was able to actually live as a human being in the world, right? And naturally, of course, this poor kid is homeless and his parents have kicked him out. He doesn't have any ID or documentation, so WINs aren't helping him. And his crime was that he'd been trespassed from the hospital and had been trying to sleep there. And because it was winter, I asked him why, and he said, oh, because it's one of the only places that's warm. That was it. And guess what we do with these people? We criminalize them, right? And we throw them away. And they were putting him in a women's prison. It's an outrageous kind of state-sanctioned sexual violence against people as well. And homelessness. Essentially, this is a kind of killing campaign. We just don't think about it that way. But we need to start thinking about it that way, because that is how it works. And even after death, they do not respect you. They will denigrate you. When I worked at the coroner's court, I came across a file where one of the Auckland coroners had reported on a trans man's death, but because he was Samoan and the family were conservative, he was not only dead named throughout almost the entirety of the coronial finding, but when I reached out and said, hey, this seems fucked up, why don't you do something about it? The coroner came back and said, well, his family was, not using the correct pronouns, of course, his family was conservative and didn't really know that much about his identity because he'd, run away and escaped from them. So to be respectful to the family, we have done this horrific thing, even in death, in our coronial finding. It's obscene. There's no other word really for the structural, institutional way in which consistently people are denigrated because they are marginalized. New Zealand, I was talking to a prominent lawyer the other day, and what she was saying was, I was kind of surprised that, the Iraqi families have been here since, the 90s and stuff that we deal with in family law, that actually they tend to be more conservative even than the ones that they're, because they'll try and arrange marriages with people who are from the home country who come over. And those people seem to be, even more progressive. It's surprising, isn't it? Because they've been in New Zealand for longer. They've been here to imbibe our values. And I had to say, our values are not progressive. Like, I don't know what world you've been living in, but New Zealand is not a progressive country. Culturally, institutionally, when you ingratiate yourself into the business community here, you imbibe those values, and those values are the values of death.
Yeah, there's this cultural and structural and institutional inertia, right? Like this horribleness around it that needs to be shifted. And you can see, even with that, you can see a difference between people who are trying to do better, and people who are like, no, actually, I like it like this. And I think in the case of this RNZ story, I'm happy to call them complicit. I'm happy to call the organization complicit in what's happened here. I think the biggest clue for me was that they've come out to say, oh, this wasn't a story about gender. All right, why was it shipped to your journalist by a far-right anti-trans group called Resist Gender Education New Zealand?
And I just want to also to tie what Simone was just saying back to also the point about fascism and white supremacy. I think it's really key that Alex's story is being told from the perspective of his parents. And in that case, you were referring to, Simone, again, it was about the family, presumably the parents, who weren't accepting of a transmasc person's gender identity, which just goes to the idea of women being property, misgendering transmasc people as women, and then saying that their families' decisions or beliefs about their identity is more important than their own identities. Like, that's why, the difference between transmisogyny and transmisandry is so cut along those lines of privilege and ownership and reproduction. And it can't be emphasized enough that it's 2025. Sorry for the current year argument, but you cannot be a commentator or a media figure or someone who exists in this world and is aware of politics and not be aware of what's going on, or at least not have the tools to educate yourself if you want to do more than one blast of email to people who are going to tell you there's a coronial inquiry, I can't talk, and then just copy paste whatever the fuck Resist Gender Education sent you.
Yeah, it is necessary, and I think we've said it before, but I'll say it again, that it is necessary for the fascist project to have these kinds of both ideological and pseudoscientific beliefs that don't interface with reality, right? That liberal cis people will approach the notion of transness or being intersex or somehow gender non-conforming in any way with the idea that using somebody's actual name and their pronouns when referring to them in the third person is like a nice thing to do. It's a game that we play to play pretend for people, which is why you see this obsession with assigned sex at birth. Like, okay, but what's your real gender is what they're asking, right? Because it is a necessary part of the fascist project to have a pretense that not only gender, but sex characteristics and sex itself is this immutable platonic ideal which exists in heaven somewhere that you've been assigned and been shadowed, right? That these aren't things which actually change and have a bimodal distribution, which you literally change through biohacking your body and also through your kind of reflection with the gender in the community back at you, right? That this is a mutually constitutive, constructed thing, that identity is quite a complex and layered project, right? Which exists, and language is a discursive tool which shapes that. There's no understanding or knowledge either of the social component or of the actual scientific component. It is necessary to believe pseudoscientific myths about sex in order to perpetuate this project. But this is something that liberals agree with fascists on. And if you want to say, well, actually, I don't like, this slide into fascism, again, you'd better get some sort of education, and you'd better have some kind of understanding of unpacking why is it that it's necessary for us to believe in these kinds of Barthesian mythologies. And the answer is always the reproduction of patriarchy and the way that capitalism is structured and organized.
And hey, a final point on that. You know who just won a big victory while talking about material issues that matter to people and class and inequality and billionaires and also
Zohran
supporting trans people?
Mamdani.
Zohran
Mamdani.
Mamdani.
We've got time for one more story. And thank you for doing that voice, Simone. Who had it on their bingo card that the Secretary General of NATO would refer to Donald Trump as daddy this year?
Not that in particular, but all right-wing politics is sexual pathology. So,
I mean, I've read some pretty messed up stuff online, where
I bet you have.
other parties were calling Trump daddy, but this one wasn't one of the pairings on AO3. So this is a rare pair for the first time.
This
We're
is a
getting
crack fic, actually.
Yeah, we're getting a crack fic rare pair of the NATO Secretary General calling Trump daddy. I don't know if you noticed that the White House also called him daddy in an Instagram video. There was a video of him landing back in the
yeah.
States, and they set it to Usher's Daddy's Home, which is
Yeah.
awful because that song is legitimately about fucking. So
He is fucking America. I don't know.
it's just, I just think it's so strange. Like, where I feel like statesmen never used to do this, and it is really sad that statesmen now talk like
Oh,
this and act
in
like
the
this.
West, in the West.
In the West, statesmen in the West are calling a ambient dictator daddy, which is just disgusting, frankly.
To be
Right?
fair, Macron has been the fandom bicycle for a long time.
Yeah,
You see a
but
picture of him with anybody, and it's like there's wild chemistry going on.
Trump has no chemistry with anybody. It's like putting a trash can next to a rock. You're like,
Not even
okay,
his big, beautiful generals.
we're gonna make the two things bone. It's just not working. But I just think it's so bizarre that the use of this as well, I think almost disguises the fact that Trump basically fled the NATO gathering. He spent less than a day in the Netherlands. He just did like a round trip on Air Force One, basically. He was like, I'm done now. Like, I've done policy, and like his only contribution to this entire affair was basically ensuring that other NATO countries were going to boost their defense spending by ridiculous amounts.
Yeah,
Like
Trump can't
all
spend too long near The Hague, or they might decide to actually do the right thing.
They
he
might
just
close the
went to the
door.
Netherlands. He was like, okay, guys, like everyone ramp up for World War III. And they were like, okay. And then he flew back. Like, what? That's not doing diplomacy. That's not doing deals. Like, what do we even call that? You know
Well,
what I
I'm
mean?
I'm
Like, what
just
do we even call that? I just don't.
I'm just flashing back to that scene in I can't remember which season of The Boys where Homelander tries to take over the corporation, and in the first meeting, one of the executive vice presidents asks him a question about like quarterly forecasts for the
Mm.
expense call or whatever the fuck it's called. And he just kind of has this moment of clearly shorting out because he's
Yeah.
like, "No, I'm the boss. I don't have to know things."
Yeah.
That is 100% Trump. Like The Boys is just such a terrifyingly prescient show.
Yeah, it is. And it's also so grubby for everyone at The Hague to basically have praised him in press afterwards, when all he did was go there, be like, right, like I'm the big boss, like I'm the reason why we even met, which we know is not fucking true, because that's not how NATO operates. It wasn't like
Trump
I'm the big
invented
guy.
NATO.
I called the NATO meeting and all my NATO friends showed up. Then
What
I
do you
went
think the
home
T in
because I
NATO
was
stands for?
tired.
It stands for
Like
T, Kyle.
it's
Trump doesn't
just
spill it.
it's just so bizarre that everyone was so nice to him about it. Not even just the disgusting daddy's home refrains, but just the positive press that he even came to the table at a global conference, which is what you were supposed to do as a state at a global conference. And bearing in mind, all he has done, I think, consistently throughout his tenure is shit on NATO and talk about how useless it is, how bad it is, especially when Ukraine was on the agenda, right? Like he had other things to say about NATO. It was a real, like, this is like a real enemies to lovers situation here, which I don't really like. But he had so much trash to talk about NATO a couple months ago, and now it's like they've just forgiven that. They've just okayed it. Like, did anyone even write about what Zelensky might have said at this recent gathering? Probably not. It was all consumed by news about this daddy thing, which is terrible.
They know which side their bread is buttered on. And if the Trump social media team knew what they were doing, they'd be calling him mother. Because there's nothing like, I mean, he's a repressed Upper East Side queen, you know? America's first gay president, sadly.
It doesn't suit the fascism though, does it?
No.
To be doing that. And I think, that's really what it's about. The NATO thinks they're relationship managing by doing this kind of stuff. The EU leaders are like, oh, we've got this guy's number. We'll shower him with praise. We'll call him the big dog. And that'll keep US funding of NATO, which is incredibly important to ensure that their offensive alliance continues to operate. And they're not taking no, I was going to say they're not taking into account the fact that he's like America's off the rails at this point because the European countries are right there with them. This is getting workshopped even before Mark Rutte's comments calling Trump daddy. We had the UK and German spokespeople spreading this lie about Iranian nuclear capacity, like being close to a weapon, like accepting that lie from Israel, which had earlier been disproven by the US and then suddenly somehow overturned and everyone forgot about it. Um, and saying, repeating over and over again, Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. We support Israel's right to defend itself. Like we're so far from, we've always been far from reality with the way that Israel is talked about in terms of its aggression. But we've gone another step here. This is just like, no, they're ours. They're our guy. We got them off the leash doing our work, and so we're going to run cover for them. And it's not a good position to be in. A large number of Western power brokers and hegemonic entities actually want the authoritarianism. They're like, oh boy, chance to do outright fascism again. We've been keeping it under wraps for a long time and having to kind of keep up this theater around how we're a democracy. Not for much longer. Let's really get things rolling.
Israel, a country with undeclared nuclear weapons. Absurd.
I think there's also a theme from what Simone was saying earlier about the media's relationship to David Seymour, and it's again about sunk cost fallacy. Like for a lot of these powers, even if they, would tut obviously, oh no, the slide into fascism is so bad, but it's different when we do it. There's also just a sunk cost of the institutions, like the post-World War II institutions. Like surely that's the way the world's meant to be, and we can't cope with the fact that the world is rapidly more and more obviously not that way anymore. And the United States is not, well, maybe it's just a bit more mask off, but it's not the, responsible superpower it's meant to be for all of these structures to keep working. And yeah, the only thing I'll say about the daddy thing is that I bet you Judith Collins is kicking herself for not doing it first. You know she wanted to be the first person to call Trump daddy on Twitter.
I thought you were saying she wanted to be called daddy for a second.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that as well for Judith. Like, I could kind of,
All
that's a
right,
new
that's where we'll
character.
end the episode. Thank you so much for
That
joining
is
us,
not,
everyone.
but that's her energy. I totally agree
Thank
about
you,
the David
Kyle.
Seymour
Thank you.
connection. I mean, I was just looking at this this article and stuff. Well, it's not an article, sorry, it's an editorial and opinion column and stuff by Verity Johnson, which I think this is about as far as media can go, like in a mainstream publication, which is saying, and I quote here, he should be more civil in the way he fights. That's as far as they can go. He should realize that he's not some fringe political figure who can get away with twerking on TV and ranting about sushi being woke anymore.
Objection. He never twerked on TV. He did
This
something.
is true.
I do not countenance labeling it twerking, because twerking actually requires skill and agility.
And then, of course, goes on to say, he's a smartass, wisecracking, fight-starting guy. He's funny. And you're like, what? Like, who are these
To
people?
whom?
Who are you spending time with? I'm not going to barbecues where people are like, let's fucking blow up the Ministry of Pacific Peoples. Like, what?
He absolutely feeds, though, into that model of white New Zealand toxic masculinity, which is you say something offensive and then you just kind of chuckle until it becomes so awkward that other people start nervously chuckling. And then it's like, see, I'm funny.
Yeah, it says, but he's also the sort of person who can drive even the legendary kindness of Jacinda Ardern, that's the quote, that's not me, into calling him an arrogant prick. And he knows this. I bet you he loves racking up the left. What do you mean racking up the left? The man is threatening stochastic terrorism against people. He's not racking people up, but this is as far as media can go. The rest of it will just be praising him unapologetically. This one is saying he should be more civil in the way he fights. He's not a small figure anymore. He's the deputy prime minister. He should be polite about sicking his attack dogs and neo-Nazis on people.
Yeah,
What?
we talked about this last week, right? The media is not an instrument of democracy. It's an instrument of power and capital. Like, and we're starting to see that more and more. We do need to wrap it up though, for reals. Thank you so much for joining me, everybody. Thank you, Simone.
Thank you, Kyle. I'll be releasing a list of who's daddy later.
Thank you, Ginny.
Thanks. I'll be reporting that list so that it gets taken down immediately.
And thank you, Stephanie, for joining us
I
again.
better be on that list, Simone.
And thank you to our audience. Thank you for listening in. There's lots of good stuff happening out there. You can actually get useful information. You can get good analysis. Listen to us. You'll hear about things 6 months to 2 or 3 years before they actually happen. You'll be able to understand things about politics that the media are just not going to be able to tell you. And we're right in ways that current New Zealand media is just struggling to be. Share, like, subscribe, Patreon. Stephanie mentioned it earlier. Give us some money. Let us make more stuff. We always want to be creating more content and getting more information out there. This has been another episode of 1 of 200. We'll catch you next time.
If artificers are, then I'm living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's apart now. It's paved with good intentions, and I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when they quote this as a cost we ought to stay. 'Cause I live amongst the people every day. This vindictive, forgetful fucking rain. It feels like we're on the road to hell.